Theatrical Shenanigans presents The Panel Presents with
Scott Sickles,
Dana Schwartz,
Cole Hunter-Zubak,
Judy Klass.
Hello there, and welcome to our last episode of The Panel Presents for this year. I hope you're very well wherever you're listening. As always, I'm your host, Rachel Feeney-Williams, reaching out from my corner of Devon in the UK with this monthly show dedicated to fabulous chat about theatre, with, of course, my four wonderful panellists, who I'll now introduce you to. My first panellist is a Los Angeles writer, director, producer and actress. As an actress, she's performed all around the world, and as a writer, she's won a multitude of awards and had works in published print. She's co-creator, writer and performer in the 9-episode Zoom series Isolation In, currently airing online. And if that wasn't enough, she is the co-creator and producer of Theatre at the Museum at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. Taking all that into consideration, it's amazing she's found time to come and chat with us. Please welcome Dana Schwartz.
Hi, everybody.
My second panellist actually made his debut on Theatrical Shenanigans quite recently as a playwright of our Halloween piece, the Paranormal Club's 7th annual Haunted House Sleepover, but that is only the beginning of his accomplishments. He's a Michigan-based playwright and actor who's been produced in 6 states, stars in the Fragile Mind series produced by Broken Arts Entertainment, and is the co-creator of Counterculture. And I'm thrilled to be introducing him once again. Welcome, Cole Hunter-Zubak.
Hello, happy to be here.
My third panellist is also someone who's gained a connection to Theatrical Shenanigans quite recently, as she will be a featured playwright in our 3rd season in 2024. Outside of that, she's another very busy and talented woman, with one play published by Next Stage Press and another by Samuel French, now known as Concord. She's also had 41 productions of her plays across the USA, in the UK, Canada and Ireland. When she's not busy writing amazing works that have won awards, she is also a teacher at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, as well as following her passion of songwriting. I am utterly in awe to have her here. Welcome, Judy Klass.
Hey there.
And last but certainly not least, we have a fourth US panellist. Originally from Pittsburgh, he has had productions of his plays performed all over the world for the last 30 years. He's also a winner of multiple awards, including 5 Writers Guild of America awards and 11 Emmy nominations for his work on the daytime serial General Hospital. His list of awards and achievements would literally put me out of breath to read them all, so you can understand that I am thrilled to have him here. Welcome, Scott Sickles.
So glad to finally be here.
Okay, we move on to our first group question. Why is the theatre important in your mind? And we will start with Cole.
Oh, that's a big question to start to lead off. I think theater is important because I think it brings people together, but I think deeper than that, it's something that I think everybody can find a home in. There's so many different facets of theater that somebody can be involved in. So I think everybody can and find a home there. So that's why I think it's important. There's not many other industries in my mind where you get to do that and start building community that way. So I think that's the most important thing.
Absolutely. Judy.
From a sort of selfish writer's point of view, I think writing for theater can make you a better writer in every other way. I mean, if I teach playwriting, screenwriting, my students think more like movies from the beginning because you just see more movies as you go through life. But we start with playwriting because I sort of say to them, that's where you learn to create 3-dimensional characters, create relationships where there's sort of subtle changes and give and take and strengths and weaknesses. And that's where you develop an ear for dialogue. And with movies where you're supposed to, every page or so, or every 2 pages cut somewhere else, you're never going to be able to explore sort of characters and human relationships and with that kind of depth and intensity.
Scott?
Theater, I feel, is just so important because it is, it's very much a document of the time it was created, part of oral history and oral storytelling, just from the first people sitting around a campfire and getting up and acting something out, like what happened that day during the hunt. That's theater. You have a story, you have an audience, you have performers, and in the writing of all that down, we really get to see how people lived, regardless of the genre, regardless of the time and the place of the play. It's a reflection of the voice of the time, and the society that it was created. And I think that that is just so absolutely important. I just think that in the very grand scheme of things, we get really, really granular glimpses into what the world was like.
Dana, assuming there's anything left, what about you?
There's nothing left. They stole all my stuff. I just wanted to, yes, and I would like to add that I think theater allows us to not just tell stories, but share stories, right? In a way that that other mediums don't quite hit, right? I love movies, I love reading, I love going to a museum. Something about the live audience aspect allows us to share stories and see ourselves. You know, it's an exciting way to see different things on stage. And what it does, I think, is it unites us. We can always sort of find a piece of ourselves in whatever the story is that's being shared.
Continuing with Dana, Andrew Scott recently said, when you've just seen a play, it's a really sensitive time. How easy or difficult do you think it is to become emotionally invested in a play, whether watching, directing, or performing?
First of all, big Andrew Scott fan. For so many reasons, not just hot priest. But I think that's so incredibly true. And I think I would go one further and say that there are some things that you don't discuss. My father used to say there are things you don't discuss in polite society, politics or religion or movies. That was his thing. It's like, you know, these are the things that people will fight. They will go to the mattresses about, are their opinions on politics, religion, and movies. And I feel like theater's the same way. And we become emotionally invested, whether we like the play or we don't like the play. And I think that all of that is valid. I would rather have somebody come see something and be just horrified and disgusted rather than just go, okay, cool. Right? You want to evoke emotion. I think that's what we do at our core. We want to allow people to have an outlet for their opinion and their emotion, and we get to be the mirrors for that. So yeah, I think it's very easy to become emotionally invested. I think you should.
You took the one unique word out of my mouth there, which is there's nothing worse than the and it's always that kind of same tone. It happens with films, it happens with, you know, TV shows, anything. He's like, what did you think of? And you just go, there's nothing worse for me. I was like, I sounds really cliche, but I'm very much like, I think you have Marmite reactions. Either you love it or you hate it, and that's when you know it's affected you in some way.
I agree with that. And I'll go you one further and say that as the older I get, the less I'm interested in being a part of a project that I feel about. You know, there are some things I'm like, I have to go to work. I have to go to this meeting. I have to read this play. And I am trying really hard to not do that anymore. I want to be invested, love it or hate it. I want to be hooked in.
Yeah.
I started freshman year like 5 years ago, and something that upperclassmen would always tell like the new freshman class was like, do every opportunity even if you don't want to. And like there's always this like this kind of pressure to like fill your plate with things as much as you could, even if it wasn't anything you're interested in. So, you know, that's something that I've been trying to work out as well. I try to talk myself out of so much, but it's so hard because I feel like, you know, I'm like, what if this is the one opportunity that I don't do, but it's the one that could have like given me something more that I want.
It's scary to say no, but it's super empowering too as an artist to be able to say no. And I think that you have to develop that confidence. I think that that's a huge part of this, especially, you know, we don't make a lot of money. We don't get a lot of acclaim, you know, in the theater. So to be able to say no and know that you can stand behind that, it's a tricky thing. So good for you.
But I think just for further what folks are saying, there is the aspect of what if this is the opportunity, but I think it's also true. Sometimes, you know, it's not. And you can just say no, because you also don't want to like be tied down to this one awful thing that you're doing for no money just to get the experience. And then you actually, you know, have to, say no to a paying gig because you go up in a day and a half and you can't leave the production in the lurch. But I think just also with the emotional investment as an audience member, it is sort of its own mini marriage where you are definitely committed and connected to these people for however much time they are on stage.
But also, getting invested as an audience, I find you get that a lot with revivals or alternative productions of classics, and you think walking in, I've seen Macbeth, I've seen The Mousetrap, I've seen Death of a Salesman. What are you going to do to this play that I like? And am I going to love it or am I going to hate it? And there's a certain amount of real trust there that they are not going to ruin this play for certain audience members who've either never seen it and this is their first awful experience of it, or have seen it so many times and it's been amazing that you are the awful experience of it.
I think when you see a play that really moves you, sometimes it is a private experience, getting back to that original sort of quote or question, and you just maybe don't want to talk to people about it. You just want to sort of go mull it over for a week or something.
I remember the first play that did that to me was Henry IV, because of the sword fighting, and they actually like chunked up a chunk of the stage and it flew into the audience. And I was like, this is real. This is really, it was so exciting to me. It just changed my life. And so you hope that you can keep having those experiences, to be able to experience awe, I think is what keeps us young. So I hope that we get to do that for people of all ages.
The whole show must go on thing, I think, comes back to that. Everyone being so emotionally invested in shows going on, regardless of what's happening. And that was the biggest travesty about COVID, was that there was nothing any of us could do. If we could have stood arm in arm as creatives and fought COVID, I think we would have done.
Absolutely.
So, Dana, your final thought before we move on.
I think the joy of being emotionally invested is sort of what we're all fighting for. It's why we do what we do, whether we're on stage or backstage or in the audience. That's the reason to do theater, to see theater, is because you're hoping for that emotional investment.
Cole, another quote, with Sir Ian McKellen commenting that theatres are mollycoddling audience with warning signs. How essential do you think warning signs or trigger warnings are to a production?
I don't call them trigger warnings. I use content disclosure, content notice. So I think using that, I think trigger, especially right now, is such a buzzword.
Yeah.
And I think when people see the word trigger, they automatically go into it thinking they have to be upset about something. So I like using content notice or content disclosure, something along those lines. But I think it gives people an opportunity to be prepared. Maybe some people aren't ready to see something that is going to be on stage. But I also think, we want to respect those people that may not be ready, and we don't want them to go into something and then maybe have to leave, or they, get upset that they weren't prepared for the content, if it was especially heavy or just something they weren't ready to see. But then I think using the phrase like content disclosure or content notice, using for a phrase like that, it leaves it so if people do want to go into something and be surprised, they don't have to like see trigger and then immediately have to read what it is. They say content notice, or you put a content notice on the website instead of maybe on the front of the playbill. That gives patrons the opportunity to go in blind if they want to go in blind. So I think that's why I prefer that phrase myself. And one other thing I just thought of too is, like, I'm thinking about myself. I've been writing for 5 years barely. Nobody knows who I am. If they see that a theater
we know who you are, Cole.
Oh, thank you. But if your average person may not recognize my name, they're not going to know what my play's about, and it may not be easily Googleable. Going to start that trend now.
Hashtag Googleable.
Googleable, yeah, let's get it going. I think having a content notice on a play like mine, where the writers relatively unknown is going to be really helpful as well. If they can't find the information about the play, then they're gonna have to go in blind regardless if they want to or not. So I think, it's important at every level, but especially with new work, so people can, be 100% prepared for what they're about to see if they want to be prepared.
I think the evolution of the warning sign is interesting, because initially it started out as, warning, this play contains strobe lighting, explosions and loud noises. So they catered to the sensory element of the audience. And then it evolved further into contains, violence, nudity, certain language. And then it's evolved even further. And you kind of get to the point where you think, well, how far does this have to evolve? Because as Dana said in her previous question, talking about religion and politics, do you, like, if you take a play to a certain country and there's different religions involved, do you then have to put a warning notice because it contains references to a certain religion? It's, yeah, I mean, you could fill your, like, the inner page of your program with warnings if you were so inclined.
That's a fascinating situation, and I think it depends on, like, if you were taking your play to another country, that's one thing. If another country is producing your play in their country, I think it actually falls to them to determine, like, how much their audience needs to know, and I think that actually regionally, like here in the United States, is relevant. But yeah, I think that where you take the play, it does reflect the values. You don't want to especially in highly populated, for instance, Muslim areas. You don't you want to be very, like, if your play is representing Islam in some way, you want to make sure that that the community is aware of that. But I think the big question is, there's a difference between a content warning and a spoiler. Content warning, like on the NPX, on the New Play Exchange, it's really great to have it right there so someone knows what they're going to be reading. In production, you don't want it splashed all over the poster.
It separates the two between kind of what is health and safety and what is, as Cole described, a content warning. Because health and safety is stuff like strobe lighting and explosions, and she said smoking, because it can physically affect your audience. Whereas
it's the difference is we're talking the difference between physical health and safety and mental emotional health and safety.
Yes.
I mean, I have mixed feelings about this stuff. I teach a course on sort of plays, a drama lit course, and we just I made it about plays about the family. So you start with sort of Oedipus and Antigone, and you go through into some Hamlet, but then a lot of the 20th century plays are pretty heavy. And when I had someone in my family get very ill and then die, I couldn't read the plays for my class. It was so hard. It was just like sandpaper on an open wound. And I just told the English department, let me teach poetry, let me do whatever for the next few years. And now I can teach it again. So I'm sort of very aware of it. And I do warn students. At the same time, there are some students, I agree with Paula Vogel when she says that theater should make us uncomfortable. And I think there are some students who don't ever want anything to make them uncomfortable. I think there are some students who, if someone's mean to a woman, if there is a sexist, dismissive person in the play, they assume the play is sexist. And I try to sort of say, people could be mean and disrespectful to a woman or a person who's a member of a minority group, and rotten things could happen, and that person could not prevail at the end. And the play is not an attack. The play is meant to make you angry and make you think harder. And it could still be a feminist play or a play in favor of civil rights. And I think there are some folks who just want to be cocooned away from all of that. And for some of them, trigger warnings or content warnings can be related to that desire to just not have anything unpleasant filtered out. And I think that's a danger. And there's so much in this country. There's a lot of book banning on the right now, but there's some on the left too. And so it's all a very tricky debate, I think.
Absolutely.
I wonder, though, as a playwright, what you guys think about, is it the producer's responsibility or is it our responsibility as writers? to put those warnings in.
I've had inquiries from schools about a couple of productions, and I had one quite recently, and I mean the play would have suited a youth group perfectly fine, but I did say to her in the email, just to warn you, there's a little bit of kind of dodgy language, not horrendous, but dodgy. And I said, if you want to take it out, that's absolutely fine. I have no issue with that, because these are school kids. You don't necessarily want to encourage them to swear.
But then, like Scott said earlier, each region, each city, each theater, the audience is going to be extremely different. So they may have different content notices or disclosures that they need for their community. So that's not. I may want them to be noticed as something that they don't really care about, but there may be something that I don't even think about adding that they want their communities to know about. So I think if it's really heavy, like sexual assault, suicide, then I'm going to do that myself. But outside of that, I typically will leave it blank and let whoever is producing make that final decision if they feel like their community needs one.
I think if a producer or director has gone digging into the bowels of New Play Exchange for a play, then they will find whatever treasure they find. If they find a piece of treasure and they know what that's about, then it is their responsibility. Then it becomes their responsibility to reveal or not reveal to their audience as they see fit.
I agree with that completely. I think if there's a tough subject matter as the writer, you can definitely put that in your description. But otherwise, I think it's the responsibility of the producing entity for sure.
Cole, your final thought.
This was a great discussion. I feel like just hearing everybody's comments and like different experiences with it. I mean, I think it just kind of showcases, I think it does showcase the importance of it, but also the importance of the conversation around it. Because, like Judy mentioned, there may be some instances where maybe some people are looking for that because they just don't want that, but not for the right reasons. So I think, I think this shows that there's a lot of different perspectives, and I think it shows that we haven't found the exact right answer yet, which I think is the most exciting part about this conversation, is that we don't know what the exact answer is, but that means that we get to keep exploring and trying new things until we find it, which I think is really exciting, especially with theater. So I think that's where I'll leave it for now.
Judy, what do you think of the growing popularity of pay what you can productions in theatre? And with the cuts in the funding for the arts, at least I know over here, I don't have as intimate detail over in the US. Do you see it growing further?
In terms of funding for the arts, I don't know that there's more to cut in America. There's no funding for the arts in America. Hasn't been for years. So I mean, prices are up, but prices are up for everything. It's a tough time. I mean, and then we're talking about, we were talking earlier about COVID. Theater has not fully come back from that. And I think theaters are I understand theater's trying to be accessible to the public. I understand them trying to find ways to fill the house. And I just think, there are so few theaters producing new work. I mean, it's such a difficult thing, especially with new work. People can fill the theater if they're putting on Annie or Arsenic and Old Lace, or, they're doing the Addams Family musical or something. But if it's new work, how do they break even? Can they pay the actors? Can they pay the playwrights? I just think we should all get angry at the government and protest them and write letters. I mean, and just create a public nuisance and just demand more funding for the arts, to lower ticket prices and compensate, artists and all the rest of it. Often getting mad at the small theaters, and they're doing it for the love of what they're doing.
So the play that I'm producing right now in Los Angeles, we are in our second week of a 4-week run, and I changed all of the tickets to pay what you will, pay what you want, pay what you will, whatever it is. I don't think can, but will. And we did that last weekend, and our numbers went up immediately, right? So the question was, what do you want? You want you want to break even, which we won't do. This is a small theater in Los Angeles. We are definitely not going to make our nut, right?
Yeah.
So there's a certain percentage as a producer of what you want to get back, or do we want butts and seats? And so I decided that was my priority, was live human beings experiencing live theater. That was more important to me for this production. And I will
Absolutely.
say that what has been really exciting to see is the shift in the audience, right? So that our demographically age dropped a little bit, and we got more young people coming to see theater. We had more first-time people to our space, which is incredible. And so what you hope is that you can retain that audience, that they'll come see the next thing now, that this was exciting and they'll see the next thing. I am a firm believer in pay what you will, just because, I've been there. I've been in a position where I didn't have $20 to go see somebody's play and had to get a comp or had to scrounge for a twofer. I don't want people to do that. I want them to, if you're inspired to give me your $20, give it to me. If you only have 5, I'll take that 5. But mostly I want your butt in my seat.
Absolutely. Just bouncing right off that, like, totally agree. And like, that's why I love the pay what you can, because it makes theater more accessible.
Yeah.
And like, I can think of, when I was in undergrad, I didn't have a full-time job. So like the free time that I had, I was always looking for free activities, or like things that I didn't have to pay an arm and a leg for. And like the shows that I did go to see, I was picking the ones I really wanted to, because I knew I had to pay, a lot more to go see them.
Because I always felt that theater is something that everyone should be paid to do, but no one should necessarily have to pay to see it. You should just be able to go. And that's a terrible business model. It is not at least certainly not in this country. But a friend of mine once said, I think theater is something you should pay for after you see the show. And it's just like, yeah, how much money do I want to give? It's like a tip. But yeah, I just, I mean, I love the pay what you will models. Pay what you can is always tricky language to me, because it feels very judgmental. Because if you don't have any money, it's just like, okay, well, here, I can only pay you $5. And then if you actually do have like, a reasonable amount of money, and it's just like, oh, pay what I can. Well, I can give you $100. And it's just, but now I feel guilted into it. But like, I love the pay what you will.
I certainly understand the argument for not having fees, but I think some people think that if we shut down all the theaters that say we're having a new work festival and we're charging a fee, that there'd be all these wonderful no fee festivals. And I think it's possible there wouldn't be. I think what you get is people just say only people in this one county in Arkansas can submit, or you have to write a new play and include, a pigeon, a macrame, t-shirt, they set things and you have to write a specific new work, or the ad is, or the opportunity is only visible behind a paywall, or they say you don't have to pay up front, but if we submit your work, you have to pay $100, or you have to self-produce. I mean, those are kind of the options out there, and submission fees, as obnoxious as they are for some people, that might be less obnoxious than some of these. Again, I'm in Nashville. I can't produce in New York at this time. At other times in my life, I live in New York. And so it's just, again, I just think we should all get angry at the government and yell at them. We shouldn't be all attacking each other, because there are certainly scams out there out to exploit playwrights. They charge fees and the festival never happens, or they just produce themselves and their friends. But there are also small theaters producing occasionally new full-length plays, and wading through hundreds of submissions and trying to keep the lights on in their theater. And I'm just sort of saying, if you think the theaters are all just getting rich doing this, let's see your budget for producing a new work festival.
There's a theater festival out here that has a submission fee. It's a summer playwrights festival. I know one of you had a play in it this past summer. It's a great company, and that is their biggest fundraiser of the year. And that's how they say it. We're going to do this thing, and this is what the submission fee is, and this is our fundraiser for the year. So like theater companies like that, submission opportunities like that, I am much more likely to pay a submission fee for something like that, just to support companies and let them produce anything, you know, especially new work, by all means, especially world premiere stuff. If my $10 whatever is going to help you do this, then fine, whatever. I don't mind. It's the ones that are shady, or they're not exactly saying, you know, what that fee goes to. They're not paying their readers, they're not paying their, you know, actors, they're not paying their playwrights. Those are the ones I refuse to do.
Okay, Judy, final thought.
Yeah, theaters, there should be accessible tickets. It should be easier for acting students and playwriting students and people associated with theaters to get cheap tickets. People who are involved in the theater world, there should be special ways where they sort of, people who want to go see a lot of theater, like you were talking about, Cole, should be able to, and we should all just be smarter and think more about how to do it, I think.
Okay, final question. Scott, with an increase in productions of an absurd and experimental nature, do you think the linear storylines of classic theatre are becoming more obsolete?
Short answer, no, regardless of how much the theater world is trying, but no, I don't. If Shakespeare and Ibsen and just all the classical, all the playwrights from before, even before 1950, from 1950 back to the Greeks are still around. I don't think they have to, you know, too much to really worry about from the avant-garde movement. And I think there's one of my favorite quotes is by a French writer, Paul Valéry, I believe. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing his name. But his great quote is, "Everything changes except the avant-garde." And it's always like every time I see something that is like new and daring and just this groundbreaking vision that has never been done before, it's the 100th time I've seen it. And it's just and I think what really matters, whether it's, you know, a faithful production of a classical play or an adaptation, or something like new and absurd, or absurdist, or bizarre, is, you know, it always comes down to the same thing: does this individual production work? It really just depends on whether or not it works. And I think that you know, it's not great for the community to put one style against the other. Because you know, you can do an absolutely faithful production of anything and it will be a crushing bore, and that doesn't mean faithful productions are boring. It just means that, you know, this one didn't work. I've actually when I ran a theater company devoted to new plays, and we had a classical theater wing because I personally felt it was important to you know, for us to create new things, to know where we're coming from. There's a lot of different ways you can approach classical theater, and you can adapt it. You can build plays around it, and you can be faithful to it. And it's going to be good or bad based on its own merits, and it's going to be good or bad based on the merits of how you build that performance.
It's trusting the audience to realize they don't necessarily need 1, 2, 3, 4 end anymore. Like, I'm not necessarily saying, you know, they're gonna get given 1 M, a quarter, 7 E, 5. But they, at the same time, they don't necessarily need everything to be in a neat row and everything to be tied up in a bow. At least that's my perspective on it, anyway.
No, absolutely. And it's like when you're like learning fundamentals of playwriting and fundamentals of dramaturgy and things like that. I mean, those are great building blocks, and I think it's important to know the rules, so you can build on them or break them. You need to kind of like know where you're coming from, and like the basics of your art form, because if you want to go completely, you know, off the wall, you know, you have a compass, and the audience has a compass. So so if you're going over the edge, over that waterfall, they can follow you.
But I do want to say, I think that the trend of immersive and experimental and whatever the buzzwords that you want to use. Basically, it's ways to engage an audience, which I think if you are doing theater at all in the last 5 years, 2 years, 6 months, is almost an impossible feat. It's Sisyphusian, if you will. And so how do we make it an event, right? How do we make it, because my husband works for the LA Philharmonic and the Hollywood Bowl. They have a 17,000 seat venue, and they sell out all the time. So why are people going to the Hollywood Bowl? Why can't I get 51 butts in my theater? So how do you engage? How do you make it immersive? How do you make it exciting? You have to make it an event. And I'm hopeful that the pendulum will swing back and we can all do our Snick and Old Lace again, but I doubt it. And so I think that you can do a classic production. You can write a 3-act structure with 7 characters, but you have to find a way for that to be exciting for an audience, because we can't do this in a vacuum. We depend on them. We need them just as much as they need us. And so how do we engage?
But then again, I think it's very much, if you want to tell the audience a play with a story, then that's fine, but you need to draw them in to the story, and otherwise they'll never get invested, and they'll never think, this kind of relates to me.
I used to say when I was a bit more fundamentalist about these things, avant-garde is French for pretentious. And it's just and it really, because but like here in New York City, there is a very specific dividing line, 14th Street. And if you're seeing theater above 14th Street, you know what I mean. If you're seeing theater above above 14th Street, that is going to have a beginning, middle, and end. They may not be in that order, but they're going to have a beginning, middle, and end. They're going to have characters you can understand. It's going to be human. It's going to be it's going to be very traditional, even if it's a little off the wall. And below 14th Street, if your narrative makes sense, and if one bit of dialogue follows another, and you can connect them, well, that's darling. That's so pedestrian. Isn't it great that you're doing things in the same boring way everyone has always done them? And there in both ends, there's a bit of, there are noses in the air on both sides of that dividing line. Like experimental, that it's a very broad amorphous term. It's like art or theater. I mean, it's just like art. If someone did it and you're watching it, technically that's art. There's nothing that says it has to be good. If it's theater, okay, someone's doing something and you're watching them, that's theater. If it's experimental, if you're taking the thing, or you're departing from the thing that is traditional, that is experimental, whatever the thing is. In theater. And it really is that broad. Absurdist is very specific. People think, oh, this is absurdist, and I'm like, no, it's not. You did nothing that was absurdist, but it was weird, and I had fun, or I didn't, and I. But
absurdism is studied, weird is natural.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
I really like your point about how, like, this is how you described experimental there, and like that's how I've been feeling. I've been kind of falling. I feel like I write a lot of horror.
No.
What? And like,
at all.
I don't, because like I think it's so cool, and I want to see more of it on stage. But like, a big part of the experiment with that, I may be writing a linear storyline, but how do you, bring Michael Myers on stage and without, Hollywood budget? Or something I've been trying to do is, I love found footage movies like the Blair Witch Project. How do I bring that, and how do I put that on stage, and how do I replicate it? Like, well, I'm writing a linear story, but how do I bring something that's done on film? And that's the experiment. And like
crossfades.
I know. Oh yeah. I've been so like, I really liked how you explained that, because I feel like that's kind of where I fall with a lot of my stuff. So when I was looking at this question earlier, I didn't know, like, I don't think linear theater's gone, because I feel like that's where I fall. But also I feel like I try to do things that I feel like I try to write stories, or I come up with ideas that other people don't do. Is that experimental, or is that just a new layer of a linear story?
I would say it's very much in manner of perspective, because say I write stories that go from start to finish, but I also write stories where the characters are all human, and I write stories where the characters are all bottles of drink on top of a fridge. And yet they are both linear storylines, but they are very different in the way that characters are, air quotes, traditionally meant to appear.
Genre bias.
Mm.
There's so much genre bias in the theater. I know someone who was like, well, it's great that you've written science fiction for the stage, but science fiction does not work on stage. I was like, you are mistaken. There's an entire movement of peak theater about science fiction on stage that I have just, discovered. Not
Have you heard of a little thing called War of the Worlds?
War of the Worlds, RUR. I mean, science fiction has gone back, yeah, and but it's like, I think, like space opera is not something that works on stage very well. No, you can do it. You can do literally anything with two chairs, and and the question that annoys me most is like, why didn't you write this as a screenplay? And I'm like, well, because I wanted people to see it. That's the first reason. But also it's just because, I grew up, being told you can do anything on a stage. This, the stage is, there are no limits to what you can do on a stage. And then I do this thing and it's just like, not that. The scenes are too short. And I'm like, there are fewer scenes in this than in Antony and Cleopatra. I checked. Is Antony and Cleopatra a screenplay? It has a lot of setting, rather. There's no set. And it's just, I'm like, Shakespeare was doing this. I don't know why it's like, it's not just reserved. I'm not saying I'm Shakespeare. I'm like, I don't know why the technique is just reserved for like this one guy at the Globe.
I think a Zen ideal is a play like Night Mother, where you just have two women, an older woman and a middle-aged woman, and they're just on one set, and it unfolds in real time, and they're having a conversation, and it's compelling enough that you just watch it in real time. There isn't even an intermission, and it holds your interest. And when I teach playwriting, screenwriting, I do encourage, because students, because we see so many more movies than we see plays, I do say, put two people in one room with two chairs, have them sit in the chairs. Chairs aren't like necessarily representing a car. I mean, I also like movies like How I Learned, plays like How I Learned to Drive, where they're sitting there and they're in the car, in the folding chairs, and that represents a car. But I sort of say, at first, just put two people in a room and let them have a conversation, especially if you're writing a short play, because people write plays where two people are walking through the mall and someone goes into a store and shoplifts something, and the other person says, I can't believe you did that. And they go down the escalator and they wander into the Cinemaplex. And I'm like, how would you stage it? And they just aren't thinking like a play. So there is some value into sort of when you're sort of showing students the difference, and you're saying, with a play you can have long scenes and really explore characters in depth and a relationship in depth. There is some value in doing that. In terms of this nonlinear stuff, I mean, I have a play one full-length play that's sort of nonlinear. Most of my plays are pretty linear. I mean, things like Death of a Salesman is not linear because, Willie Loman keeps wandering into his sort of delusions about what was happening in 1928 or just before the stock market crash. It's still pretty canon. So experiment. I mean, we're talking about a bunch of different things here. I saw one production of King Lear. I would think it was not just experimental, it was absurdist. I was in England at the time. I was visiting Cambridge, and it was the most exciting thing I've ever seen. And I'm not a real experimental theater person. The guy playing Lear came up to me and put something in my hand, an imaginary object. It was the most thrilling moment. I don't know if he gave me coins or I don't remember what he gave me, but it was just so exciting. And it just really underscored that Lear is just a bonkers play. It's one of those Shakespeare plays that's just out there, and a really experimental production just distilled that. So, I mean, I think there's a way to make it exciting and to do it badly. I write some science fiction plays. I write mysteries, but I don't want them just to be about whodunit. I want it to be a real play that's more than just the whodunit, and I think you can have artistic value, and it doesn't just have to be like sort of solving a puzzle. I think there's a good way and a rotten way to do just about anything in theater.
You can fiddle and play about with stuff, but I think the key element, regardless of whether it's linear, absurd, experimental, or anything else, is you need to draw your audience in. Because you lose your audience, you've not got a play, as far as I'm concerned. I could be wrong, but
100%.
Final thoughts, Scott.
I don't think linear storytelling is in any danger, and I don't think nonlinear storytelling is in any danger. I think that I think it's always about what the playwright needs to do to tell their story. And if that's a straight line, if that's one room, if that's, two characters, if that's, a dozen characters, you're doubling up. You've got your dumbwaiter, and you've got, your Coriolanus, and you can go to town. And I think that there's a lot of room for a whole lot of imagination.
Final question of the evening. Describe a moment when you found yourself thinking, this is why I love theatre. And we'll start with Dana.
Oh, good. I love theater. Theater is my favorite thing. It is my longest relationship. It is my my best friend. It is my frenemy sometimes. But I am, and the reason is because I'm frequently thinking, this is why I love theater. Oh, this is why I love theater. And the most recent example of that for me is I run a new play development program here. And we culminate after 9 months with a first look reading series. And one of the writers wrote this play that I just adore. And in the audience were at least 10 people who had never seen a play before. They've seen television, they've seen film, but these were people in their 30s that had never ever had a theatrical experience at all. And they were awestruck. Right? They're holding on to each other. They're pounding on each other when stuff was happening. They were vocal, they were verbal, they were excited. And watching them watch this reading, a stage reading of this brand new play, and get that excited and that engaged, that is why I love theater.
Scott?
There are a couple of moments that spring to mind. As an audience member, I saw a production, and I talk about this one a lot, a production called The Seven Streams of the River Ota by a Canadian auteur, one of these days I will learn how to pronounce his name. It's either Robert Lepage or Robert Lepage. But it's, and his company at the time, Ex Machina. The Seven Streams of the River Ota was literally like 7 one-act plays, all of which ran about an hour. And it was told over 2 nights. It was a 7.5-hour production. And not only were there 7 one-act plays, but the whole shebang had a prologue and an epilogue. Okay. But there was, it was a wonderful example about how you can take every theatrical convention and device and technique and throw it against the wall and put it on stage, and still do it in service of telling several stories that also told a panoramic, unifying story. And there's one. It took place between 1945 and 1995, and there was a section that was taking place. It was a flashback, long flashback play in a concentration camp, and the entire thing is staged on this sort of pagoda-like facade. This is taking place in a Nazi concentration camp, and there were frequently screens that came across the front of this pagoda facade. This one time they brought out, they were clear glass, and the backdrop of on this facade was mirrors. And it was like, okay, we're looking through glass and we see the mirrors. And then the concentration camp was being liberated, was being evacuated. And then people started crossing between the front glass and the mirrors. And what we realized then is that the front glass was actually a two-way mirror. And we were looking through it, and the people walking through were infinitely reflected. So each time 1 or 2 people would walk through, it was like we were watching literally thousands of people, hundreds and thousands of people walking across this stage. And it was like our minds just all exploded, because we were watching hundreds of people in the concentration camp being evacuated right before us on stage, with like a cast of like a dozen people. This simple trick told this amazing story. And that was one of those moments where I'm like, oh my God, this is why I love theater.
Judy?
When I was a kid, my parents, I grew up in New Jersey, but we go over the bridge to see theater. They'd take me to Shakespeare in the Park. They'd take me to everything, like Cat in the Hot Tin Roof, when I was like 7. I had no idea what was going on. No idea. But I really remember they took me to a collection of Sam Shepard plays I think in the 70s, and one of them is a play called Killer's Head, and we didn't even make it into the theater yet. Before you got into the theater, in the lobby, they had it's about a guy in an electric chair, and he's waiting for them to kill him, and he's just thinking about things he cares about, like horses and feeding the horses, and that horse will, if you put it together with that one, that you'll have a foal that'll be a racer, and it was just this young black man with I think blindfolded with like tinfoil are supposed to be the things holding him to the chair, just sweating bullets. And we staggered into the theater. I barely remember any of the plays after that, but it just absolutely galvanized me. So then years later, when I had a chance living in the Village to see True West, the Sam Shepard play True West, and it just knocked me into next week. I mean, so that a huge influence on me. So those moments, and then I think I directed the first play of mine that got produced, an hour-long play in New York, and that with the cast that I had chosen, and they were wonderful. And so those are some moments that come to mind.
And finally, Cole.
There's two big ones that really pop up. The first one very recently, growing up, I had a lot of struggle with my sexuality and kind of accepting that part of myself, and that's something that I still struggle with. But recently, for the first time, I wrote a play about it, where it was kind of like a list of like things I hated as a kid, but then it transitioned into things I hated about myself as a kid, and mainly dealing with my sexuality. And I hesitantly released it, and the response I got from it about that, just that community, that was a big moment. Like, this is why I love doing what I do, because I'm able to accept myself and be myself, and people are going to accept that as well. And I don't have to feel bad about being myself. So that was a big one. And then the second one, which I think this is the most impactful moment for me, which also is the moment I always go back to for this is how I know I'm doing what I was meant to do. It was not even a few months after I started writing, maybe about 6-7 months. And it was my first play that I ever wrote that was getting put on at my university for a staged reading called Type 1. And it's about my experience as a Type 1 diabetic. And this is also therapeutic because I was diagnosed very recently before I started writing. So this is like a very new experience for me as well. So, just I put a lot of heart and emotion into this play. And it's about somebody not being able to afford their insulin. And I'm sitting there and I'm watching it, and I'm just like, this is my first time seeing anything I've written put on. So I'm just like bright, huge smile. I'm in the front row, like dead center watching. And these are my friends doing it too. Two of my friends who are both in my grade. So I was just like loving it. And at one point, about halfway through, it was only like an 8-minute script too, so it was very quick. At one point, I turned, and there's this young woman about my age sitting next to me, a couple rows over, or a couple seats over, and she was just bawling her eyes out. And like, I never saw her again. I never got a chance to talk to her. She probably didn't know I wrote it, but like, I don't know who this woman was, but she just like seeing somebody's reaction, seeing that reaction to like that story, that experience that I wanted people to learn about, like I knew this is what I was meant to do, and I knew that that's why I loved theater.
Okay, well, we are just about out of time. Guys, thank you so much for being here. This has been an utterly amazing conversation. I literally cannot thank you enough. So thank you for coming along and talking to me, because otherwise I'd be very lonely.
Thanks for asking us. This was lovely.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
thanks for having us.
And that is it for this episode of The Panel Presents. I really hope you enjoyed the wonderful chat I've had with my 4 panellists today, and you can join us again in 2024, where we'll have many, many more. Of course, we still have plenty to come before the end of the year, including our final episode of Season 2 of Theatrical Shenanigans with The Little Christmas Tree by Dana Hall. Then, on Christmas Eve, we have a full-length special for you in the form of A Christmas Carol, but Not As You Know It. So, I hope you can join us for both of those. In the meantime though, I've been Rachel Feeney Williams, this is Theatrical Shenanigans, bring down the curtain and saying, I hope you can join me next time. Theatrical Shenanigans is part of an RFW Scripts production, found on Spotify, Amazon Music, Podbean and anywhere else you can find your podcasts. Music is written and produced by Chris Cody.